All right, now we get into the talk story part of the evening where we talk about Hawaiian culture, history, legend, language, healing, and the philosophy that we call Huna, based on 7 ideas about life. That the world is what you think it is, there are no limits, energy flows where attention goes, now is the moment of power. To love is to be happy with, all power comes from within. And effectiveness is the measure of truth. We talk about all these things in the way that I was brought up in this knowledge, and that's by question and answer. Tonight I'm going to start off by answering an unanswered question and talk a little bit about the second principle, kala, that we interpret as that the world is what, no, not the world, that there are no limits. There's a lot more to that word. Kala is a word that means release. It also means freedom. It has to do with forgiveness and all kinds of things that help set you free. With this, all concept of freedom carries the idea, of course, that I said before, that there are no limits, which implies that this is an infinite universe. Now, we talk about this every once in a while, some of the implications of that. Well, let's go into them a little further. The implications of an infinite universe are often ignored when people start talking about the universe and infinity. A popular thing in science today is talk about multiple universes. Well, the only way you can have a multiple universe is if you've got finite area of experience that you're defining and calling a universe. But this is really demeaning the language, because uni means one, and a universe means the whole thing. Multiple dimensions, multiple worlds, multiple aspects, whatever you want to do, but multiple universes really doesn't make any sense linguistically. So let's get back to this idea of the one, because even if there are multiple whatever, it's within one thing. So, and that one thing, there is an assumption that that one thing is infinite. Now, it's kind of a logical assumption, because if there's something else, then at some point something's got to be infinite. When you carry the idea across that, well, this is our world, this is our reality, and there's something beyond it, okay, fine. And if that never ends, you're left with infinity. But now let's look at the consequences of assuming that there's an infinite universe. Because that assumption necessarily implies that everything in that universe is infinite. Can't get away from that. That any finiteness then is only a perception, because you can't have a division of an infinite universe. If it's infinite, then everything in that universe must be infinite, but we have the ability to focus narrowly, to restrict our perception, which is what we do in this three-dimensional reality. One of the ways of looking at this reality is electromagnetically, and this kind of implies, if you can imagine a kind of a line of sequence of frequencies in our universe that we experience, in our world that we experience. Why, down at the lowest end, we have radio waves. And then we get further along, and we have infrared that we can start to feel. Now, radio waves we really can't sense directly, but infrared we can. And as we keep going along that spectrum, it's called very often, then we start getting into the sense of touch. Then we start getting into the sense of sound. Then we start getting into the sense of sight. But those are not continuous. Because when we examine the frequencies, we have radio, which has all kinds of bands over here of different kinds, including microwave, is in the radio range, okay? That's why, if anybody remembers, in early days, they used to be called, when they first came out, they were called a radar range. Anybody remember that? A few of you oldsters. Right. Okay. So then, beyond that, there's a break, and then there's infrared. And then there's a break, and then there's the sense of touch. Then there's a big break, and there's a sense of sound, and then there's a big break, and there's a sense of sight. Sight is not right next to sound. There's all kinds of stuff in between. And then there's beyond sight, when we get into the ultraviolets and up in the gamma rays and things like that. Okay? So when we're looking at this infinite universe, we're looking at it primarily through three small windows, the very narrow range of frequency perception: sight, sound, and touch, primarily. Okay? Smell is in there someplace, but primarily it's sight, sound, and touch. And this is how we experience our whole universe. And it's like being in a big house with all kinds of windows to look out on the world with, but most of them are black or got curtains over them. And we've only got three windows, and with those three windows, we try to determine what the universe is like. Okay? And we find with our research, with this frequency range and with effects that we can create, that there's other stuff going on, where we get radio and infrared and all that. So we know there's other stuff going on we can perceive indirectly. But directly we look at this world, and for most people, that's the nature of the universe. If you can't see it, hear it, or touch it, it doesn't exist. And yet if we look at it more closely, all kinds of stuff exists that's beyond that. It's entirely possible, if we want to get a little, some people would call it fanciful thinking, but it's really not too fanciful. We exist as electromagnetic entities. You examine a human cell close enough and you don't find anything there, because it finally ends up being nothing but energy. In fact, you try to find one electron of your cell, and you can't find it because it's never quite where you look for it at that moment. We are really very insubstantial. But because our senses are oriented in a particular way with a particular focus, we perceive ourselves as solid. But somebody in the radio range, I'm assuming there could be a somebody there, and there's no reason why not, would think that they were solid in their frequency range. And they might hear in infrared, and they might see in magnetic frequencies. We have no idea, okay? There's no rule or law that says everyone has to perceive the universe the way we are doing it. This is all sort of interesting, but then we get further along and we thinking about this idea that it's an infinite universe. Well, another conclusion, two more conclusions that are very important. One is that anything must be possible. I think I'll save that one for another time. The one I want to mention right here now is, if it's an infinite universe, and we are all in that infinite universe, and we are by definition as infinite as the universe, we've all got to be in connection with each other. And everything we do must have an influence of some kind on the rest of the universe. It doesn't necessarily, sometimes that'll be a big influence, but not necessarily. It could be a small influence. Your most vigorous physical action might shake an electron in an atom of star Sirius, maybe, for a moment. But in an infinite universe, there must be an effect. Now, closer to home, in this world, the closest thing you have to you is your own body. Now, mind you, in Hawaiian, the word for body, because they understood these things a long time ago, the word for the body is kino, which is built up of root words that translate as a highly energized thought form. Ki is energy or force. No is intense. Ki is an image. No means a thought. Highly energized thought form is what the human body is, and that word can be applied also in Hawaiian to anything physical. So here we are, energy. And energy affects energy. So when we have a physical action, that affects our physical world, but not just that. It can affect our mental emotional world. A child in a classroom who raises their hand, the teacher sees the hand raised, there's a reaction. There was no direct physical intervention there or interaction there, but the raising the arm was interpreted to symbolize something that the teacher acts upon. So you can have a direct physical action, and it can have mental and emotional effects on the world around you. You can have an emotional action, an experience, and that will have effects on the world around you. It will affect people to the degree that they care. Right? And that doesn't mean necessarily they care about you, they might just care about the emotion. Right? It'll affect, actually, your physical environment. It can affect the food you eat, the food you cook. It can affect the wind and the air, as well as the emotions of other people. And even physical things. Okay, more physical things. I mentioned the food you eat and so forth. It can affect the growth of plants. That's been demonstrated. Your emotions can have that effect. Another form, if you like, of energy. And your thoughts also have an influence. That's why I like to tell people sometimes, people think that, that telepathy, which is sending your thoughts at a distance and producing an effect, is some real deep esoteric knowledge. No, it isn't. Write a letter. And if somebody laughs, cries, is pleased or unhappy, that's a form of telepathy. You have symbolized your thoughts. They have looked at those symbols and responded to them. That's a physically oriented form of telepathy. But the other idea here is that even the thought itself, since it's an action in this universe, and since we are all energy, that thought sends out waves that influence things in your environment. It can influence water. A lot of recent experiments showing that. It can influence plants. It can definitely influence other people. And the other half of this is, as part of that infinite universe, you're influenced by everything that's happening in it, too. You're not just influenced by the people who are around you in close proximity, not just by the people you know. You can be influenced by any of the people in the world who are thinking or feeling in a way that resonates something that you have in your own memory or experience. So some days you might be reacting to somebody on the other side of the planet that you've never met and probably never will. But because the two of you share some idea or concept or reaction, why yours might be amplified by what they're experiencing. And it works with animals as well. We know from so many anecdotes as well as studies how animals can respond to thought and our expectations and our fears. Well, so do human beings, and so do fish, and so do trees and fruit and rocks and everything else. The influence varies, but it's always an influence. So, with that sharing, let's get on to questions along the same line, if you like. First of all, anybody want to ask any questions related to this concept? Yes.
I often thought that movies and books, when you read a book, authors say that, we've said that the characters come to you, they come to you.
Yes.
You don't create them, they kind of create themselves into your life. into your awareness. And then, so then they're alive, and then people read the book, and they have a whole relationship to these written
Characters. Other people will. Sure. This, as a writer, I can tell you I start off thinking that I create a character. And maybe initially I do, but then that character takes on a life of his or her own. And it's the most amazing thing if you write fiction. Sometimes these characters will not do what you want them to do. I mean, it sounds funny, but if you do get it down in words on paper, it just doesn't work. And you have to tune more into the character. They take on a life. And then sometimes, as has happened with me, characters will just pop in. I'm in the middle of writing something else, got my chapter all laid out, bam, 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 somebody's knocking on the door. I want to be in there. And in comes a character with an entire history. All I have to do is record it. It's not something I have to think about and make up. It just, boom, the whole history is there, complete. And then the other part of what you said, then people read these books, and if these characters resonate with something almost universal among human beings or deep within many, why then that character becomes a person. Let's take Sherlock Holmes. As a result of the Sherlock Holmes books, some people, of course, began using the tools and techniques that were in those books, and other people began to relate to Holmes as a real character and wrote books about his personality, formed Sherlock Holmes clubs, dressed like him. It just went on and on and on and on, like people do today with movie characters. Okay, but even these written characters can have a long-term effect on a whole society. They have become real because people relate to them in that way. And if reality, as we think, is experience, you can actually have an experience of Sherlock Holmes. That makes it real.
And then they become archetypes like Batman or Robin Hood or, you know.
That's right. And then they become, as archetypes, then they become models either for other characters or for people's lives. Yeah. Something that started out apparently as imagination. See, a lot of people think imagination is not real. That's probably more real than most other stuff. Okay? Because it has effects and influence. Another question was? Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned that Kino is thought energy.
Kino, a highly energized thought form, but it's used mostly to refer to the human body. Well, okay, let's several things in there. Let me take one at a time. For the first part, yes, as part of the universe, you're connected to the whole universe. Ultimately, you are the universe, but not unless you're aware of it, because you've focused into a sense of separateness. So as long as you're feeling and thinking separately, you're not the whole universe. Okay? You're a focused part of the universe. And yes, that universe is still there, so of course you can connect with it and access it. You merely have to turn your mind to it. You are the whole universe when you know you're the whole universe. Some people call this state cosmic consciousness. It's a term that they give to it. When you have the awareness of being everything. It's a little difficult to keep that awareness while you're paying your taxes or grocery shopping or driving a car. Not impossible, but difficult for most people. So most people who do that go back and forth between the focused awareness and the cosmic awareness. Okay? Which you can do if you want. Okay? Some people live out their lives with the focused awareness only, and a very narrow one at that. Still doesn't keep them from being part of the whole. It keeps them from being aware of being part of the whole. That's all. And whether that's good or bad depends on your idea of it or what their experience is. Okay? You can get along life very wonderfully without ever having cosmic consciousness. Okay? So it's not like you need it, but it's there as part of our potential experience. Then, when we talked about who's doing it, who's making that thought, I could give you all kinds of interesting answers, and all kinds of interesting answers have been given. But one I like tonight is, you are the universe in the form of a focused part of itself. Okay? That's who's doing it. Now, if you want to give that name to the universe God, which a lot of people do, nothing wrong with that at all. Okay? But you are the whole, focused as what you are right now, and as that, you give form to yourself. That's one way of explaining it.
You know, when I was really young, I had that awareness, but it scared me.
Sure.
It really scared me.
It scares people, this kind of cosmic awareness, stretch out, no boundaries, no limits, all kinds of things. The scared effect comes from trying to experience that through a limited set of beliefs that says, this is who I am. Then you suddenly experience yourself as something totally different than that. That's what's scary. If it were possible, as a child, to think, well, this is who I am also, then it wouldn't be scary. Then you could go back and forth. And really, if you were clever, become all of it, become the focused self, or become any other part of it that you want. But it's only the rules of the limited rules that we create, some of which are pretty necessary, but the rules that we create that aren't necessary, that make us scared. Because we have a rule that says, this can't be. I can't be Fern and the universe too. Ah. Yes.
Is it your understanding that Rainbow Man represents an entity that moves between the dimensions?
What culture are you speaking from?
Hawaii.
Hawaiian culture? No. The term Rainbow Man is typically in Hawaii given to a petroglyph in which there's an arch reaching over a man's head from shoulder to shoulder. And the term Rainbow Man is one that was invented in modern times. Because the fact is, nobody has the foggiest notion of what was intended by that drawing. Only the artist. Because the artist may have been trying to portray something literally, magically, symbolically, and even symbolically there's all kinds of possibilities. Because one way in which you experience that arch in Hawaiian is with what's called hoaka, which is a perception of the visible aura. And sometimes that's a way of symbolizing that. Okay? But it does not represent an entity who moves between dimensions because Hawaiians didn't have the concept of dimensions. It's all here, folks. Some people can see more of it than others. Well, when I say dimensions, now let me backtrack a bit. They did have the idea of other worlds that you could travel to. And that some beings with a lot of inner power, or mana, could travel between those worlds. But those were very clear. Pele, Kani, Ku, Lono, Kanaloa, many others, had the ability to move between, let's say, the inner world. Different families had different names for it, but basically Lanikeha, Kahiki, and Milu, in my family's tradition, and this world. And that's a shamanic type of experience, which means it's something human beings can do. So there is that kind of a thing, but not a special being who only does that. unless you're meaning somebody who is spirit without a body, who has the ability to manifest visibly. But in the real Hawaiian thinking, these kahiki is simply a place out of sight, beyond visibility. May have another physical location, may not. Okay. One way that Pele came from Kahiki into this world, as an example, Pele was speaking of the volcano goddess in one of the legends. As spirit, she was sleeping on the big island, heard in Kilauea volcano, heard some drumming, rose up as spirit, followed the sound, came to Kauai as spirit, which means from the point of view of the people here on Kauai, she was still in Kahiki, and decided to manifest as a physically beautiful woman so that she could make love with the chief. Okay? So in a sense, that's moving between worlds, but not in the locational sense that most Westerners give it. And if you have the know-how, there's no veil that has to be torn or ripped, no process to pass through anything. If you have enough consciousness and awareness and technique, you just do it. Okay. Yes?
This Bigfoot that you've heard about
Yes.
in the Northwest, and we had wondered if perhaps that is a being who sometimes walks within our dimension, if you can say that, and other times.
Within our perception, let's call it within our perception. We're talking about one of the theories about Bigfoot in the Northwest and many other kinds of creatures around the world, even New Jersey. Okay? One of the theories is that this is a creature who comes, it's usually described in Western terms as in and out of this dimension. And another way to describe it is simply in and out of our perception. Okay? Or crossing over from a parallel world into this one. There's all kinds of ways to describe it. And one of the reasons given is that nobody's ever actually found it in a way that will convince other people. There have been footprints found, there's been fur found, there's been photographs taken, but if you don't want to believe, you won't believe. Okay? None of that will convince you if you don't want to believe. There is another interesting fact, and I'm not saying whether this is so or not. I have not watched one manifest, so I can't tell you my thoughts on that directly. But I am aware of another fact that's very curious. Almost never has anybody found any bones of grizzly bears in the Northwest. Over the years, there have been thousands of grizzly bears. But unless one is killed by a hunter right then and skinned right then and there, nobody finds the bones of grizzly bears that have died naturally in the wild. They've never been found that way. Maybe they're interdimensional creatures too. Okay? We really don't know that. But it's a curious fact. Okay? Yes?
So it's not to say that we're all interdimensional. Really, are you saying it's low consciousness to take you there and you can actually go somewhere else?
I'd say that yes, are we all interdimensional is the question, and I'd say yes, from my point of view, from the point of view of the things that I was taught by my Hawaiian family, yes, we are essentially all interdimensional. But essentially it doesn't make any difference if you can't do something with it consciously. This is also a Hawaiian idea. Yeah, it's nice to say that you're interdimensional, but can you catch fish with it? Okay? So, yes, we think the possibility is there because we think all possibilities are there. We just have to find out how to do it.
So if you go into that zone and join there, can you actually take yourself to a place where it is of led because you're just sitting there and you're going, and you're just allowing yourself to be taken wherever it might take.
How do we get there? Some people move into these spaces, let's call them, spontaneously, often when they're daydreaming or when they're night dreaming. And they find themselves in these locations and they wake up and they think it was a dream. Shamanic tradition says these are real places. Strange as they might seem, they're just other real places. And shamans develop techniques for doing that on purpose and experiencing these other places and healing there and learning there and bringing knowledge back. Okay? But everybody, in some fashion or another, does that kind of tripping. Okay? But different cultures and individuals will interpret the same experience in different ways. But yeah, it's there and it can be used. Now let's look at this from an ultimately extremely practical point of view. Okay? With as few assumptions as possible. The one fundamental assumption that it seems impossible to escape is that you had an experience. Okay? Now, the basic shamanic element comes in and says, great, what can you do with it? Here, it doesn't even matter if you define it as a real experience or not. If you can produce some good from it. So the essential thing is that it's an experience. Everything else is interpretation. So based on my family tradition, one thing, I'll always bring it down to the core element like that, but I'll also share our favorite ways of interpreting things. I'm not saying they're true, although I'll talk like it sometimes. I'm not saying they're true. They are interpretations. We use them, however, because they're really useful interpretations. And that's our measure of how good an interpretation is. Because you're never going to experience anything outside of yourself. Well, what about out of body? Well, that's still inside part of yourself. You're always going to experience anything through yourself. And this whole idea of whether there's a reality external to us is nonsensical, because no one's ever going to experience it. They just might have a broader experience of who they are and what they can do. It's still them perceiving and interpreting. Anyway, get it back down to practical. Yeah, you can go to some really exciting inner worlds and have a lot of fun. As well as gain experience, teach, heal, bring stuff back. Yeah. Yes?
This is an infinite universe. Does that mean that when we die, it goes on forever and we just keep coming back?
No. If this is an infinite universe, does that mean that when we die, we just keep going on and coming back? I'd have to say no, because it all depends on you and your interests and your focus. If it's an infinite universe, you can learn to do whatever you want. Typically, you will do what you've been trained to do. In a society that believes firmly in reincarnation, if you grow up with those ideas and expectations, that's what you'll probably do. In a society that believes in going to heaven and never coming back here, until you get bored, that's what you'll probably do.
From your personal experience, can you make any comments on the idea of concept of destiny?
About what?
The concept of destiny.
Destiny. Ah, yes, right. So let's take that in the context of an infinite universe. Destiny. Obviously, logically, if it's an infinite universe, if we accept that assumption, there's no room for destiny. There is room for plans. And one of my favorite sayings comes from a bumper sticker. It says, life is what happens when you're making other plans. Okay? Or another one I remember, man plans and God laughs. Okay? One way of interpreting experience that many people like is the idea that their life is planned out, they have a destiny, that whatever happens is part of that destiny. Because it gives them a sense of security, and because it takes away the blame for when things go wrong. Well, you see, I couldn't help that. That's part of my destiny. Okay, it was supposed to happen that way. It also takes away the idea of failure. Yes, right, I was not able to succeed. I couldn't make it happen because I was destined to do something else, or that thing that I wanted was not supposed to happen. And a lot of people use that. I can tell you right straight out, in my tradition, we do not. You're either able to do something or you're not able to do something. If it's an infinite universe, so is the future. Have infinite possibilities. Now, Hawaiians understood this because they had people who would do forecasting, just like we do today. And when someone would make a forecast, they had two responses to that. One was, do everything you can to make that true. And the other one was, do everything you can to make it not true. They took action. Sometimes it was symbolic ritual action, sometimes it was practical action. The forecasting was useful as a guide to strong possibilities, but not as a guide to what was going to happen or had to happen.
How does that fit in with the concept that I know you have, that there are no accidents?
Of course not.
So that seems as though...
That means there are plans.
Right.
When I say that there are no accidents, everything that happens is the effect of conscious or unconscious decisions that people make. Everything that happens to people, okay?
But you could say that that's somebody setting up their destiny in a way.
In a way, sure. Hey, I can tell you I am. I'm writing books because I want them out there helping people and I want them to be sold. Every day at that computer, I'm setting up my destiny. Okay? May happen, it may not, but I'm doing my best to make that come true.
So you're like co-creating your universe.
Co-creating along with everybody else involved in some way in the same thing I'm doing, including those who want what I'm writing and those who are going to publish it. Yeah. So, of course, that doesn't mean, however, that is kind of like creating destiny. That's different. That's like, another word is simply making plans and doing your best to carry them out. Okay? It doesn't mean it is intended to happen or that any entity decides whether it is supposed to happen or not. Not in this tradition.
But you can program, and you may have consciously or subconsciously programmed a result that you're moving toward.
Let's look at this idea of programming, okay? And people talk about programming for a result. Let's be real clear so we don't get mixed up. You don't program the universe. You can program yourself to have certain expectations and certain behaviors designed to bring about the result that you want. And when you do that, you're influencing the potential result very definitely, but it's still only influence. It's important to remember we're not controlling it. Programming implies inevitability. Well, I'm programming the weather to be good tomorrow. We say that. What we're really doing is programming ourselves to expect good weather, and the weather usually responds to those expectations. But not always. Because it's got its own things that it wants to do. Everything in an infinite, we didn't really say much about this, but if one thing is alive in an infinite universe, everything has to be alive. And even if it isn't, everything in the universe responds to everything else in the universe energetically. So, the wind is going to be responding, but you're not alone in the universe as a focused being. There are many other focused beings, some of human and some not, that have their own agendas, their own things that they want.
So everybody focuses together.
Everything is influencing everything. And that always modifies the outcome.
So if everyone were to focus together
Yes,
on one thing,
yes,
it'd be more likely that it will happen.
yes. And thank you for all focusing on the experience of this museum. Okay? Because here it is.
Can we come back to that focus thing that you were talking about, where, really good plan?
Well, those were exaggerations, okay? Those were exaggerations. Because so many people make plans and get real upset when the plans don't work out perfectly. Well, they're never going to work out perfectly. Sometimes they will work out really close to what you want, but there will always be differences. This is why there have never been 100% accurate predictions. Ever. By the most powerful clairvoyants in the world, by the most powerful computers in the world. There have been small amounts of predictions that have come out accurately. But small parts of it. Never the whole thing. And what people do is then they forget about all the parts that they said would happen and didn't. They say, see, I said that would happen. Okay? That's what we tend to do. Remember the best parts. Okay? Yes?
You were saying earlier about create rules and scare ourselves without rules.
Yes?
How do you do that?
Well, we make rules. You see, rules, how can I put it? Rules strongly influence experience, but again, do not control it. Right? So when we have an experience that's outside our rules, we react to that. If we have an experience, if we have a rule that says there are dangerous creatures out there at night, we're going to get scared every time we go outside. I'll give you a little example of what happened. I have a son, just visited us recently. And this son is now a Navy SEAL, one tough guy, okay, although you would never know it to meet him. But when he was small, he was very afraid of the dark, especially the dark outside. So one time, we'd go outside and I'd carry him, and he was afraid that because he couldn't see. And so he imagined bad things. So one time in the daytime, with the assumption that everything is alive, I introduced him to every bush and tree and flower in the yard. Just made introductions. Okay? Then that night, as I brought him outside, before he started to get scared, I'd say, "Oh, your friends are still out here. The ones you met earlier." And he immediately relaxed. We went up outside and we introduced ourselves to all the friends in the dark. After that one experience, he was never afraid of the dark again. Because it just contained the stuff that was there in the daytime. Okay? So, when we have rules, however, the rules can make us very, very afraid, whether there is something to be afraid of or not.